Hi, and welcome to a Small, Medium, at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all of you listeners for watching us on YouTube, for listening to us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, all the other internet podcast shows. And I want to say that it's a joy for me to be here today, having all these incredibly different guests that we keep bringing to you. We're coming up, starting our third year, and we're just so happy for all of you that are there listening to us. So thanks. Thanks for supporting us and being there. I want to tell you about our special guest today. Our guest today is Dr. Debbie Joffe Ellis. She was born and raised in Melbourne, Australia. New York City has been her home base for the past 2 decades. She is a licensed psychologist, licensed mental health counselor, presenter, writer, and adjunct professor at Columbia University in New York City, where she teaches rational emotive behavior therapy and comparative psychotherapies. For years, she worked with her husband, the brilliant and renowned pioneer of modern cognitive therapies, Dr. Albert Ellis, giving public presentations and professional trainings in his approach of rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, as well as collaborating with him on writing and research projects until his death in 2007. Before his passing, he stated and wrote that he entrusted her to continue his work. She is recognized as a world-renowned expert on REBT and regularly presents throughout the USA and in countries around the world. To students, academics, practitioners in the helping profession, and to members of the general public. She wrote the second edition of the book, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, published in 2019, that she co-wrote with her husband in its first edition. She is also featured in a DVD produced by the American Psychological Association, or APA, demonstrating and discussing the REBT approach. She has written chapters for various textbooks, articles, and has reviewed applications for APA's Psych Critics Journal. In 2014, she was named Legend in Counseling at the American Counseling Association Annual Conference and has received various other awards and acknowledgments for her work. In 2023, she was nominated by former American Psychological Association President, Dr. Frank Farley, and renowned psychologist and author, Dr. Stanley Krippner, to receive the American Psychological Association's International Division's Global Citizen Award. She has a doctorate in alternative medicine from the Indian Board of Alternative Medicine in affiliation with the World Health Organization, from whom she also received a gold medal in 1993 in recognition of her service to the field of alternative and holistic medicine. She joyfully and passionately continues her mission of informing as many people as possible through her presentations, teaching, writing, and the way she strives to walk her talk. That each one of us has the power to create our emotional destinies despite and including challenging circumstances, and through teaching the how-tos of doing so. Dr. Albert and Dr. Debbie Ellis have written many books, to name a few: The Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, A Guide to Rational Living, How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, yes, anything, and last, How to Hug a Porcupine. So let's give a warm welcome and a porcupine hug to Dr. Debbie Ellis here today. Welcome, Debbie.
Oh, thank you, Gail. It is such a great pleasure to be with you and the people watching. I just want to say the two middle books I didn't co-write with my husband. I wasn't born yet. No, maybe I was, but but the first one, yes, and the last one, I was the editor of the How to Hug a Porcupine. So credit where credit is due, and the middle ones were by Dr. Albert Ellis.
That's wonderful. So I'm going to start my questions. I like to always ask a few personal questions, and then we'll get into your work. Growing up in Australia, which I have been to, and fabulous country that you come from, did you ever imagine that you would become a psychologist and marry one and live in New York? And did your family support you on your path to move halfway around the world?
I think there are 4 different questions there.
Yes.
So what's the first one? Did I ever imagine that I would be a psychologist when I was growing up?
Yes.
I did. I did.
Oh.
When I was a child, I just had this inclination to help others. Well, it's not a mystery because I was blessed to have parents who were incredibly kind and compassionate and helped other people. So, it was modeled for me. And thankfully, gratefully, I say that that inclination is there. It's a very rewarding one. And then also, my late auntie was a psychologist. And here's something you and the watchers might find interesting. I was a bookworm. I loved reading books. And whenever I would go visit my cousin, my auntie and uncle, I would go into her library and look at her books. And I vividly remember seeing books by Albert Ellis, because she loved his work. She didn't tell me specifically Albert Ellis and he's so great. I was 12, but his books, and this is one of the many positive qualities that contributed to his immense impact on millions and millions, countless millions of people over the decades, is that he could take complex, less complex, boring theoretical elements and translate them into a form easy to read and understandable by members of the general public. Sure, he wrote for professionals, and the academic language was that, but then so many of his books were so that people could learn how to help themselves. So here's this 12-year-old kid looking at my auntie's books, and never then, I think this answers one of the other of your 4 questions, would I have imagined that I would have a personal relationship, let alone marry.
I'm so glad I asked this question.
Right, right. So yeah, I thought I might be. I mean, I when I was young, there were so many things I thought I would love to do, but more and more I was steered in that direction. When I graduated high school and was in college, I luckily, my grades were such that I could have done law, which I think I might have enjoyed. But interestingly, within REBTs, there's the invitation to be logical and to dispute unhealthy thinking. So, my enjoyment of that would have served me if I'd been a lawyer, and it serves me in my role now. If I had Barbara Streisand's voice, I would have liked to be a singer. Guess what? I don't. So that eliminated that possibility. So I could go on and on. So I think I answered 2 out of 4 of your questions. What else?
Was, well, we know about that you moved halfway around the world.
Yeah.
Was your family sad because you wouldn't be so close anymore, or were they supportive in saying, yes, this is the dream of your life? It sounds like they were supportive people, so I would assume that's a yes. But how was that? Because you were changing worlds. I mean, you were talking a half a world away.
Well, it was both and actually, Gail, and ain't life like that sometimes. Um, Unfortunately, when I was very young, around 12, my beautiful, golden-hearted, amazing father passed away.
Oh,
And so I was, from then on, of course, raised by my mother. And I didn't have a large family there. I had an older brother, but he had moved away from home just after Dad died. He was a lot older than me. And it was me and my mum. And my parents literally went through hell. They had been Holocaust survivors.
Oh,
that who moved to Australia after the war, and that's a long story that I perhaps won't go into right now. We'll see if there's time later. But another contribution, that fact to how amazing they were, that they modeled to me, for me, in the way they lived their life, kindness, compassion for others, that they didn't harbor bitterness and hatred, though many people would have said they had good reason to. And
yes,
some people have said, wow, you know, growing up a child of survivors, that must have been tough. And actually, so much a part of my childhood, particularly before my father died. That was Freudian, except I'm not Freudian, so it wasn't. Um, After my father died, it was more challenging and difficult in many ways, but certainly before he did, it was a happy household because my parents
it's
focused
wonderful.
more on their gratitude for being able to have a new life, that they survived, that they had children, you know, and so forth. And their gratitude. And it was joyful. Of course, there were times where they had memories or they were talking with friends of theirs, and there were naturally tears. There was still grief. It would have been somewhat abnormal if that wasn't the case, but
Yes,
that wasn't the predominant vibe. And so my mother brought me up, and she was very attached to me because I was her predominant reason for living, she would say, after my father died. And not a very healthy dynamic, nonetheless. When I finished at university, I during that time, I was very interested in yoga and meditation. And again, longer story shorter, I actually went to India for a few years to study yoga and meditation. That was a lot harder for my mom because she was afraid.
yes.
She was afraid I was in the cult. And so, to fast forward to answer your question, she was glad that I had the opportunity to come to the States and continue doing what I was already doing in Australia, but excel in it, hopefully. That was easier for her than all the unknowns when I moved for a while to India.
Mhm. And also somehow it feels like there might have been easier communication from the States maybe than from somewhere as far as India, but also I understand what she was thinking because there were a lot of cults and there were a lot of things going on. So she wasn't really out of range and thinking that something could be, you know, maybe she's going to get swept up.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to my next question, and then after that we can get into the work. And it's just like my other ones, it may have a few in it. Your husband lived until he was 94, is that right?
93.
93, which is a really good long life. I,
Yes, but
I am,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm in an interracial marriage, and in the 50s, when my mother-in-law got married, it was illegal in 36 states. She was active in the civil rights movement, and she was the first Black woman to play a role in a Broadway production that was not a servant or slave. She was in a
Wow.
play called Eve. No, she played Eve in a play called Green Pastures with Ossie Davis.
Wow. Your mother,
So my mother-in-law,
your mother-in-law. Oh,
yes, my husband's mom. And she
hmm.
also happened to be my algebra teacher. So I met her really when I was 12 years old. But
You must have
bravo.
impressed her.
What's that?
You must have impressed her.
No, I unfortunately, even though I was in the gifted program and had a very high level of reading and other things, math was not my subject. And she was the only class that I failed, and I could not pass algebra. So I had not seen her in 20 years, but when she came to my house after her son, her only son, told her that this is the woman I'm going to marry, and I found the one for me. And she came to the door and she said, I don't know who that student was. I had thousands of students. But when she came in the door and saw me, it was almost a Broadway theatrical moment because she was dressed like a New Yorker to the nines, looking fabulous and gorgeous. She dropped her purse on the floor. I was in my sort of hippie clothing, getting ready for Thanksgiving. She looked at me and she said, "You?
Oh, I
You
love
are the one? Oh my God." So I can't say that it was a happy moment for her, but it turned into a happy one later as she got to know me and I gave her her first and only grandchild. So it all worked out in the end, but it was a funny, I hadn't seen her son in 20 years either. And he called me up and all this beautiful thing happened and also a wonderful child. And that was over 30 years ago. So I want to know, first of all, bravo to your husband, Dr. Albert Ellis. I read that he affected women's rights, racial equality, interracial marriage, gay rights, and freedom of speech. And I don't, you don't have to elaborate too much, but if there's anything you could say on how did he do that? Was it all therapy or what
No,
was he doing?
no, he was a very public figure. I mean, if in those days there wasn't the internet, but radio, television, magazines, newspapers like 3D, and he would be for many decades the go-to psychologist, not only because of his brilliance, but he was quite a personality and he spoke his truth. And so how he did that was speaking out and writing articles and being interviewed. And oh, the letters he got back, calling
Wow.
him the devil or an agent of the devil, and reminding him he was definitely going to roast in hell. He, it didn't stop him. And so, no, I mean, I'm sure if he had a client who brought up, this is my issue, of course he worked on it. No, but he really was very public about that in days where it was in some ways dangerous to do so. But he was a bold, courageous man. I mean, when he came up with his theory, he was the first one really to fully challenge Freud. Alfred Adler before him, there are a few people that broke away from Freud, but my husband came up with this whole theory that was polar opposite to psychoanalytic theory. And the majority of therapists, psychologists in the field then were psychoanalytic. And he was called, maybe they didn't call him the devil, or maybe they did, or worse, but what's worse than the devil? I can actually think of a few humans right now in our world who we maybe look
Yes.
like, but I'm not going there. Anyway, so he was called simplistic and stupid for challenging the lord of the psychology universe at that time, Freud. And practicing what he preaches, which one element of REBT is, even though it's lovely to have the approval of others, we don't need it. We don't need the approval of others to experience, own, and acknowledge that each one of us has worth just because we exist. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, he did it.
That was a very brave thing in those days to stand, because no, he could have come home and found blood on his door, or somebody could have hurt him. There are people that do crazy things when they feel you're rocking the boat and you're doing things that are disturbing the norm to them. And so it is a very brave thing that he did. And I mean, all of these things that he affected are all things that are very important to my husband and the life he grew up in, because his family were, politically involved activists. And of course, his mother was Black, his father was a Jewish, white Russian Jew. And,
Jewish and Black, he hit the jackpot, right?
right,
In terms of people who hate either and both.
right, he calls himself a Hebrew.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And for it's only in recent years, really, where the stigma of seeking therapy is lessening.
Mhm.
And it's been lessening more in white people, but it's been lingering in people of color and of particular Orthodox religions across the board, yeah, including Orthodox Christians, where, you know, just pray to God, you don't need therapy attitude. And one of, you know, with my husband's attitude and how humanistic REBT is and how it strives for justice. And even a few decades ago, when very few people of color not only were coming for therapy, but were even becoming therapists. I
Mhm.
think my husband's stance made it more comfortable for people, minority. I don't like that word minority, but you know, people who weren't white, made it more comfortable for them to study, be part of the field, or partake of it as clients.
I I have to share another quick story there. I think you might appreciate. My mother-in-law's closest friend was a timpanist in the New York Symphony, and then when she moved to California, in the San Francisco Symphony, and she just passed a year ago at 90 something, I don't know, 92, I think. And we had a wonderful visit with her a couple months before she passed. But she had received a music award, I guess I'm not sure exactly what they call it, for drumming, because she was a drummer. She received an outstanding achievement award for her music, or for being a drummer.
What
And when
was
she
her
went,
name? What
her
was her
name
name?
her name is oh God, names now gonna come out after my uh oh
It's
God,
okay.
it'll come to me in a minute. Anyhow, she I had a whole altar here for her, and now I can't come up with the name.
Oh,
And
sorry.
she
Because it was unusual to have women
well,
drummers. It
yes,
still
well,
is.
she was the timpani player on Broadway for West Side Story. And she also is on the album, because then it was albums, and that's her timpani playing in the album. Elaine Jones. That's why I said it took me a while, but the memory works. Her name is Elaine Jones. And when she got off the stage after receiving her award from the music industry at 90, all these Black men and women rushed to speak to her, to tell her that she had opened the door and paved the way for Black musicians to play in classical music, and that it was her who they felt that was their guide, and that's how they were able to get through and do the professions they had now because of her. So these people that have passed on, your husband, her, they've affected in waves of ripples that will go on and on and on, to help people be able to stand up and do the professions they want, not because of what colors they are or what races they are or whatever the words are. And it's a proud thing to be able to say, you know a man who did this, I knew a woman who did this, and they were powerful people. And we're thankful to know that these people stand up for this. She fought for her, I don't know, some kind of, she lost in court. She tried to get some sort of a thing, like after when you're getting in the symphony for so many years, I forget what the word is, and they would not give it to her. And she was in a man's world, in a white man's profession, and she succeeded very far. She used to play tennis with Tchaikovsky, or whatever his name is, the famous opera singer. uh, and Stokowski, she would play music in his symphony or something. She knew all these wonderful people, and she grew up in Harlem, and she ended up getting an incredible education to be able to follow her path in music. So I'm glad for the people who helped her along the way, because that's how she got there. So now I'm going to move into one last question about your husband. Was he pleased with all his life's work and all he had done when he came to passing? Or did he still feel that he had more to do when he assigned you to take over his work? And do you ever feel his presence or his spirit guiding you when you add chapters or revise a book or get new ideas to speak about? So it's a two question, but being a medium myself, I have to ask these, other questions related to the spirit.
Yeah, so he was working on a number of manuscripts at the time that he died, and so no, his work didn't feel finished at all, Gail. And not only that, without going into details because of time and
Right.
um, his final 3 to 4 years contained some tragic elements. For reasons of power, money, he was kicked out of his institute. He was
Oh,
prevented from teaching there and presenting there. Um, he had a non-for-profit 6-story building institute. We lived on the top floor, so we kept on living there. But after he was fired, we were no longer allowed to present workshops there or teach there. It didn't stop him. I found a big lecture hall in the building next door. So we continued our weekly public Friday night workshops where members of the general public could come in and watch demonstrations and learn the principles. Um, and we had a lawyer. We were fighting for justice. My husband earned millions of dollars, but it all went into the institute. He lived on a salary of $12,000
huh.
a year. And so we couldn't afford like PR people and the biggest lawyers that the institute had. But anyway, so his final years, my point is, we're continuing to work and we're fighting for justice, and we're living in an environment where we're not allowed to talk to anyone there because they're afraid they'll be fired. They were told, yeah. And it's this hostility, by the way, giving us a grand opportunity to practice what we preach.
Mm.
And so a lot of his energy, in addition to our work, and for years he had worked 16-hour days because that was his passion. Um, some people say he was a workaholic. No, it was his choice. It wasn't that he was compelled because psychologically he would suffer if he didn't do it. That was his passion, his love, his life mission. And so doing the work and then talking with lawyers and having these barrage of ugly attacks and threats and, you sign this, Albert Ellis, or we'll put you through deposition after, and you won't be able to survive it. And just, and then it was autumn, it was winter. The building that we did workshops in was next door. So, and he was 91. And so I would put blankets around him. You can't really drive next door. So we'd go from a warm building into the cold, into the warm building. You're presenting for 2 hours, then back. He got aspiration pneumonia, which was
Oh,
the beginning of his end. For 15 months, he fought to get better so he could get his institute back. We had the legal process going, but he died before it could be completed. Um, 15 months, his body was a torture chamber. He could have no more food or water by mouth, everything by tube.
mm.
And yet he fought to survive. So when you said he lived to be 93, and that's great, yeah, but I believe without this situation, he would have lived happily at least another 10 years. We worked brilliantly together where he couldn't hear most people. He had hearing aids, but still he could hear my voice, for better or worse, my neutral sort of middle tone rather. So no, he didn't feel his work was completed.
So do you ever feel, I'm not sure if you have any experiences like that, but do you ever feel his presence since he's passed? Or have you felt at all sometimes when you're working, like you're hearing him speaking through you in a small voice or guiding you along? Or
Um, I haven't heard him.
Mhm.
There have been times when I've been writing and I go in a flow. And then I read back, particularly closer to the time after he died. And I thought, wow, did I write that? And it's almost like maybe he was that energy, certainly the inspiration. So as the years have gone on, is it him? Is it me? Is it a combination? I don't know, but certainly that spirit is one that can be quite tangible. Um, Similarly at times with my mother.
Mhm. Well, my opinion would be that there are people who do automatic writing, or they just can feel the person and write through them. So my guess would be that the two of you have been writing together some of the time, and that you've connected on a deep level, but it feels sort of like one, because the two of you were doing that in both when he was here in body. So I'm going to vote that he actually is hanging around, interfering into your writing while you're doing it and being there with you.
He is welcome to interfere anytime.
So now I want to go into uh, what is REBT, and can you explain you and your husband's groundbreaking work with this rational, emotive, behavioral therapy? What is that? I never heard of this until Stanley sent you to be on my podcast, and I started to look up and read about you. I had never heard of this.
Had you heard of CBT?
No.
Okay.
Oh, that's cognitive behavioral therapy, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That stands on the shoulders of REBT. My husband was mentor to the man, Dr. Aaron Beck, a dear man who is called the father of CBT. Well, the granddaddy of the cognitive approach was Albert Ellis. So rational emotive behavior therapy, and shall we call it REBT for short, or we'll need an extra 15 minutes.
Right.
It's the pioneering cognitive therapeutic approach that heralded in the cognitive revolution in psychotherapy. Before that, Freud, as I indicated earlier, ruled the roost. And part of that was usually long, meaning years, long-term therapy, very passive on the part of the therapist, free association, a lot of looking back at one's childhood. And so one usually would require a lot of time and a lot of money for that sort of therapy. And so my husband, who was trained in that, because when he studied psychology, you didn't have any choice. There was that and behaviorism, early behaviorism. The early one was Pavlov's dogs. You might have heard of that. Anyway,
Yes, I have.
Pavlov and his dogs.
Yes.
Well, they weren't the researchers, they were part of his research. Anyway, and so my husband was a great psychoanalyst, but he didn't like it because being born with a gene for efficiency, he saw a lot of his patients, they were called patients in psychoanalysis, felt better after a session, they weren't getting better.
Right.
They were continuing to think in self-defeating ways that created unhealthy emotions and self-defeating behavior. And so bit by bit, he had influences, Stoic philosophy, Eastern philosophers, some contemporary philosophers of his time, Bertrand Russell, John Dewey, a little bit of Alfred Adler, and also his own creative genius. He was literally a member of Mensa. IQ up there in the same quartile as Einstein, brilliant genius. So those influences, his innate genius and constructive ability to create something new,
Yes.
also influenced by the fact that from childhood onwards, he was very physically ill, spent long periods of time in hospital. Parents rarely visited him. He was incredibly sad. And from the age of 3.5, came up with ways for feeling less sad. Most of us probably would understandably cry and maybe, make ourselves depressed, or it's not fair and all. And from the get-go, Albert Ellis was a constructivist. And I don't like feeling this way. How can I feel differently? So he looked for ways to distract himself. He'd talk to the kids in the ward or their visitors. He'd read books from the hospital children's library. He would daydream, envision when he grew up. This is to quote him, he'd fall in love with the nurses. and,
Oh,
and that became part of REBT and cognitive. Focus your mind on something else, cognitive distraction. So he created REBT, and it's active directive. It empowers a person with the tools to empower themselves to think in healthy ways so that they create healthy emotions, no matter how challenging the time or the circumstance. He's, in a way, the first person to encourage self-help. His books are self-helpish, not all of them, some are more academic, of course. And his mission was to help as many people as possible to learn that each one of us controls our own emotional destiny. It's not what happens. It's not our childhood. It's not COVID. It's not political situation that creates our misery, but what we tell ourselves about it. REB teaches us how to think in healthy ways when bad things happen, so we create healthy and not unhealthy emotions. The other brilliant offering of REBT is that many approaches inform us there are positive and negative emotions, but within the negative, REBT was the first to teach us there are the healthy negative and the unhealthy negative. Now, negative does not mean bad in this context. It means it's not so pleasant. Joy is more pleasant than grief, but grief is healthy when a loved one dies or a precious period in our life is over for whatever reason, age or financial circumstance. And so REBT teaches us to be able to recognize when we're thinking in unhealthy, irrational ways, to dispute the guts out of them. Because when those beliefs are no longer credible in our minds, they're less likely to keep coming up. And then REBT teaches us how to think in healthy ways. And just very quickly, before I finish this monologue in answer to what is REBT, the unhealthy negative emotions that we create, remember, it's not the circumstance, include anxiety, extreme fear, panic, hopelessness, despondency, depression, rage, shame and guilt. Shame and guilt often present when people attempt suicide, along with hopelessness. And when we think in rational ways about the same unpleasant or brutal circumstance, instead of anxiety, we create concern. Concern is motivating. What, if anything, can I do about this? Anxiety often paralyzes us, yeah? When we think in healthy, rational ways, instead of hopelessness and depression, we create sadness, disappointment, grief. They're healthy, they're not pleasant. Early grief is agonizing, but in time, we continue and we experience that the grief is inseparably connected with our gratitude or love for that or whom we've lost, yeah? Sadness and disappointment can motivate us. Okay, how could I do this better? What can I learn from this? Rage, the healthy counterpart, is what REBT calls healthy anger. What is this? It's that anger connected to our moral compass, where we receive or witness brutal behavior, actions, situations, but we're in control. We don't react. In rage, we react, and it usually does more harm than good. With healthy anger, we don't react. We get into the habit of thinking before we act. thinking things through. And then finally, instead of shame and guilt, we create regret, which is also connected to our moral compass, where we take responsibility. I screwed up here, I failed at this exam, or I lost the job because, or I screwed up this friendship. And so we take responsibility, but refuse to damn ourselves. We damn our bad actions, but try to learn from them. And with regret, we attempt to make amends. It's not always possible, but sometimes it is. And we make the effort to not repeat the mistakes we made. So I hope that's really clear, the difference between the healthy and the unhealthy negative emotions. And if there's time, I'll tell you the difference between rational and irrational thinking.
I have that question about 2 questions from now. And I just want to say that for me in my life, I'm grateful for all the different times that there was the dark nights of the soul, or my body went into places of tremendous pain or illness or whatever I went through, because I only grew from those experiences. And when I started to realize that I don't have to put them in, that one is black and one is white, and joy is only and happiness is what you should have, and the negative and sad and darkness is the worst thing. They're teachers. They're both teaching you, and they're both the same. I mean, I love to be in joy, but I wouldn't want to be in joy 24/7. It's like, I love Hawaii, but I couldn't live there 24/7. I need to
I
be.
could.
Oh,
Maybe. No.
I don't think I could. I like to drive. There's nowhere to drive there.
Yeah, I'm
love,
sorry.
I love the place, and I find it very healing, and I'd be happy to be there for months at a time. But to make it my full-time place of sunshine and whatever, I need more of these other stimulations. It's like changes of the seasons. These things all affect us in a very positive way, even though we may think, oh gee, the days are shorter. Oh, I'm missing my son. What they provide you to do other things indoors. So I'm in full support that negative doesn't really mean negative, like a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a teaching. It's just the same. And I also want to mention one other thing, which is that I have to say, many of my dearest friends that are in therapy, that live in Manhattan, that live in New York City, they're still going to the same person. It's 10 years later. And I'm like, so what happened? And they don't ever like separate. There's like, and it's just, so I'm thinking that they're really not getting much for their money if by this point they haven't moved forward at all.
Well, it depends on their goals. Why are they, receiving therapy? Obviously, they're lucky enough to have the time and the money. Look,
Oh
the
yeah.
long-term therapy can provide insight. And if you got the time and the money, I don't want to put down the psychoanalytic approach, but I am putting up REBT because it can go in depth in a shorter period of time. So different strokes, different folks, as they say. I favor REBT because, in my opinion, you can achieve a lot of the benefits of long-term psychoanalytic therapy in a shorter time. Plus, with REBT, the therapist encourages the clients to learn how to be their own therapist, to not be dependent on them.
That's
Of course,
wonderful.
a client to be human is to relapse. And my door is always open to a client who was feeling empowered and I don't need therapy now and I'm great. And they're always welcome back if we fall back. But it's empowering because I'm here when you want to kick in the ass, a reminder, you've fallen back, sure, I'll help you get up. But dependence is discouraged.
Yes, I'm just saying that was what I would like to have seen with some of the people I know, that they would either I would say, have you ever tried body therapy, where you work just with your body, or you do movement, or but people are happy with their therapist, and if they're happy, then I'm happy for them to be. But I'm glad to know that there's another form out there that doesn't involve for you to talk for the next 10 years. and not get too far along. So this sounds like a faster fix is, and also that I also feel the idea of being able to taught how to help to take care and treat yourself. This is giving a person a tool that they don't have to, that they can do something to be able to try and get out of, say, a situation they're uncomfortable with, because they've been learning these tools from this type of therapy that you're doing. I was wondering if there was any one or two, or just one, or if you don't want to say anything, I understand. But is there any client or story or anything that you might want to share that was an incredible breakthrough in somebody that you or your husband worked with, that was an amazing story that has always stayed with you? Like, I'm sure you've seen hundreds and hundreds of people, but are there some where a person went from, say, this particular position to now being in, a very amazing turnaround?
Many, yeah, many. I don't know how many hundreds I've seen. My husband literally thousands during his career, and there are countless instances, but one specific one that comes to mind. It's not the greatest and the
Right,
only.
no, but just a story.
It just, yeah. Um, Let me first say that in relation to REBT being about helping a person empower themselves, a person's ability to change and maintain change depends on their ongoing effort between sessions and after the therapeutic period. So if a person isn't motivated to change and doesn't make the ongoing effort, it's not hard. Is it hard to brush your teeth every day? No, but if you want good teeth and gums, you do it. And it's the same. Hello, dog. I'm seeing your beautiful dog.
Yes, that's my Bruno.
Hey, Bruno.
Oh, there, here he comes.
Gorgeous. Hey, Bruno.
He's sitting down on the rug.
Okay, take this in, Bruno. You meet aggressive dogs. Anyway, so one of so many examples come to mind is of a woman in her 30s. I'm not going to give any information.
No names, no.
Yeah, no. For 15 years, she'd gone to the long-term therapy, and it hadn't helped. And someone said, "Give this a try," and she did. She suffered from incredibly debilitating anxiety and depression for long periods of time. She was on medication, and seeing this other therapy, had attempted suicide a few times. Some of that was related to family and relationship issues. Anyway, within a short period of time, she was weaning herself, not when I say weaning herself off, under psychiatrist supervision. It's really important for anyone on medication, not cold turkey, under medical supervision. So she was weaning herself off, feeling capable of weaning herself off the medication. She was feeling less anxious. She took more healthy risks. What do I mean by that? In the past, being too afraid to be assertive in communicating at work and socially, and she was doing that more as a result of the work we were doing and the work she was doing. Yeah, so that was a great success story. Another one, a man who was probably in his late 50s when I saw him, who in his 20s called himself a severe alcoholic, and then stopped cold turkey, went to AA for a while, and he maintained sobriety for decades. And then the reason he came to see me was he was afraid he was going to start drinking again. And he remembered how devastating an effect, what a devastating effect his drinking had had on his life. And he was afraid. And so I asked him, for the worst memory of that came up that he could think of during his drinking days. And without hesitating, he said it was remembering being woken up from unconsciousness. He was lying face down in the gutter outside his house, his pants soaked with urine. He didn't remember how he got there. It was his house. And being woken up, daddy, 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 by his young children.
Oh,
And I suggested to him if his goal was not to drink, whenever he felt the temptation, to remember that. And he did that, and that really worked for him. And so, what part of REBT is that? Just using your mind to think of things, be they words or images, that help you maintain healthy behavior and healthy emotions. So and so he
that's
reported back that
no, that I'm saying that's an excellent result. And alcoholism is not an easy thing to deal. That's a very big nut to be able to work with. And this is a success story. And I just wanted a few examples so that we could just get an idea of what the results of the work are. And I think that's an excellent one.
Can I just say, with regard of the woman, how did she achieve her change? So she wrote down all the self-defeating, self-hating thoughts that she had. And this is REBT framework, and she disputed them. We did it together till she was able to do it on her own comfortably. And where is the evidence that I'm the worst, that I have to be perfect before ... Where is it written that I must always have good people around me or I can't stand it? Where is it written that I can't feel empowered and beautiful, even if there's no one telling me that? So where is the evidence? Is it helping me or hurting me to think this? And then as a result of questioning those toxic beliefs, coming up with healthy ones, not Pollyanna one, oh, everything's great or whatever, but I can stand what I don't like. I just don't like it. I would rather have the approval of my loved ones, but if I don't have it, I can still chart my own course. And repeating and repeating the healthy new beliefs for at least 30 days, neuroplasticity proves that it takes at least 30 days, for some people longer, but it's biology. We create new neural pathways through repetition. So she earnestly did that work and hence experienced the healthy emotions as a result.
and that I'm sure saved her from ever thinking about attempting suicide again. So
She's still
I'm
with us.
saying,
The last I
affecting,
heard, in a good relationship.
yes, and so how good you must feel to know that the work is really helping has to feel very gratifying for you.
I'm in awe of the brilliance of the approach, the
Yes.
simplicity and yet the substance of it. But it takes the person applying it. It's not even enough to read about it or hear about it. One has to do it. And part of REBT is daily gratitude. And that research, the Journal of the American Medical Association, a really scientific journal, had this article, most of which I didn't understand because statistics and technical long words, but that on average, a long-term study demonstrated that people with the same cardiovascular issues, one group daily gratitude, one group didn't do daily gratitude. The ones that did lived on average 15 years longer. And they had the same heart condition as the ones who didn't. So, the mind-body connection, it can't be denied. Mind-body emotion connection can't be denied.
Well, I have that question here about joy and gratitude. So I'm going to probably still ask you one more thing about that when that was my last question in our list here. I was wondering, I was reading on your website about healthy and unhealthy thinking. I think it was on the website, and I was wondering, and there was a list, and I was wondering if that was something that you could share and explain to our listeners.
Oh, yeah, I would feel totally incomplete if I didn't, in terms
Oh,
of, I'm being a drama queen here.
oh, well, I'm glad it was my question.
Yeah, no, I would still be a fallible human being who didn't complete what I wanted to share with you and your listeners. So anyway, by the way, part of REBT encourages us not to take ourselves or others or life too seriously, and to look for humor when possible. Okay, this is really important because a lot of people don't think about their thinking, and they don't realize our thinking is what creates our emotion, not what happens, as I said earlier. So when we think in unhealthy, irrational ways, and I invite the viewers to think about whether you think in any of these ways. And if you do recognize that, hooray, first step before disputing them, changing them, replacing them, repeating the new healthy one, and healthily brainwashing yourself to have healthy thinking habits. So when we think in unhealthy, irrational ways, we have demands, shoulds, musts, oughts, very rigid ways of thinking, inflexible. And my brilliant husband, again, making things simple for people to understand, identified 3 core irrational beliefs from which countless others come. And the first one is, I must do well and be loved, liked, approved of by everyone. The second one is you, and you can be an individual or a group, a family, a community, or a political party or a religion or a country or a group. So you, individual or plural, you must believe what I know is right. You must do what I think you should do. You must believe what I believe. You must be the way I think you should. Hear all the musting and the shoulding, yeah? And the final one is life should be fair and with justice. Now, of course, yeah, exactly, right?
Yes.
Now, it's healthy. I desire to be more, there to be more justice. What can I do? I wish life was more fair. What can I do? But to say something should be a way when right now, in this now moment, hopefully it'll change, paradise. But when now it's not, it should be, and it's not, we create rage or helplessness and hopelessness. So they're core, and also the need for certainty. There's a joke, nothing is certain but death and taxes. Well, a lot of people don't even pay taxes. Then we can talk about death and so on, but that's not the topic of today's podcast. So the fact of the matter is people suffer who demand certainty. A healthy person looks for probabilities, but what is certain? Really hardly anything. So continuing, when we think in irrational ways, we should on ourselves. My husband came up with this word with a U in it. Stop masturbating. When we think in unhealthy ways, we blow things out of proportion, we lack perspective, take things too seriously, lack humor. We have LFT, low frustration tolerance. In other words, I can't stand itis. In other words, I must have what I want when I want it, little baby that I am. We catastrophize, we awfulize, we think in absolutistic ways, and I think I said overgeneralize, and we damn ourselves and others and life when things don't go the way we say or think they should. And so any and all of those ways of thinking will create one or some of the unhealthy negative emotions. It's scientifically proven, there's evidence, that's a fact. And then really quickly, healthy, rational thinking is the opposite of of that and creates healthy emotions. So we don't have demands and must. We have preferences, we have wishes, we can have passionate desires. But if we don't get them met, we're healthily sad or disappointed or grieve, but we're not hopeless or depressed. We have a sense of humor. We keep things in perspective as much as humanly possible. We have high frustration tolerance, again, reminding ourselves we can stand what we don't like. We just don't like it. We don't awfulize, we don't catastrophize. And one of the most important elements of REBT that the other cognitive approaches do not emphasize is we make the effort to have unconditional self-acceptance. I have worth because I exist. I might do bad things. It doesn't make me a bad person. It's a fallible human who screwed up or who did some bad things. I might do good things. It doesn't make me a good person. It makes me a person who chose, yay, to do good things. Yeah. So unconditional self-acceptance. Also, unconditional other acceptance, that I accept that you have worth. Now, if you act in immoral ways, I do not accept your behavior. I'll fight damn hard for justice. But if my goal is stability, emotional health, I will remind myself, but for the grace of a lot of circumstances go I. If I had had that evil doers, see, I didn't say the evil person, they did an evil thing. So the person who didn't, if I had their brain chemistry, their genetic makeup, you know, they were once an innocent baby too.
Right.
If I had their biology, brought up like they were, indoctrinated to believe what they believed, and was thinking what they were thinking when they did the evil act, isn't it likely I would have done the same or similar thing? And I think the answer is yes, and I hope you all agree. REBT is not for people who like blaming others. It's for people who are willing to empower themselves to take responsibility of their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And finally, unconditional life acceptance. That even though, you know, REBT encourages realism, and the flavor of it is realistic optimism, frankly. So REBT is not about putting your head in the sand when bad things are happening, but yeah, this thing is happening. What, if anything, can I do about it? If I can, let me do it. If I can't, let me accept in life there are some things I cannot change right now, in the here and now. You know, things can change. But while I acknowledge that, let me not forget every day what still is good. Both and. So unconditional life acceptance. Yeah, this stinks, but this is so fragrant. And let me remember that.
Wonderful explanation of both. And there's no judgment on either one being better or anything. They're just what is. It's very, very wonderful. We're at our hour, we're a little over our hour, but that's fine. We have plenty of time because I have two more questions here.
Okay, great. I have a client on the hour,
so
so
I'll be quick.
I have 10 more minutes. Sorry.
Okay, 10 more minutes. Okay, so two questions. Maybe there's not enough to answer them, but I was wondering about the role of gratitude. And you say to do it every day. You just touched upon the reasoning for that. And how do we maximize the experience of joy? And the second last question I had, if we have time for it, is that I am one of those people you're talking about, the emotional one. I'm a very emotional person, and I have a reputation of being emotional, but I have never been able to, you know, if I see I just start to cry. I don't hold back on any of my feelings, or I laugh so loud and hard that I'm splitting my gut, you know, or I'm feeling such a sadness of grief or loss. And you said you wrote something about that we are the creators of our emotional destiny. So I didn't know if you had a 2-second tip on how I can deal with those things as they arise, but it's kind of a lot of question, but maximizing the experience of joy, gratitude, and emotional destiny in 8 minutes.
So Gail, is crying really a problem when your heart is touched? I mean, if it ain't broken, do you need to fix it? Are you telling yourself there's something wrong? Now, when you say you're an emotional person, I understand that to mean that you have high sensitivity and you feel emotions intensely. So, one of the things I would say would be if it's a healthy emotion, then why judge it and why try to change it or fix it? I mean, laughter or tears to me, unless you're laughing at a funeral or crying when something good happens, crying with sadness, not joy, crying with joy is great, then that's okay. And that's one of the gifts of REBT, educating us that sad isn't bad. Tears are nectar from the heart. I don't know. I just thought of that. Wow, I like that.
But I go to a funeral and there's not a person crying there, and I can't contain myself. And I look
And
around,
why
and
should
how
you?
do they do this? Because to me, there's so much, and then I feel like I'm crying the tears of all the people who aren't able to cry.
And maybe you are. So what's the problem, Gail?
That isn't a problem. I'm going to stop making excuses for myself. I always apologize to people and I say, I'm sorry, I'm crying, but I can't help it. Because people feel so uncomfortable when you're letting out your free emotion.
Well, number one, that's their problem. They're making themselves uncomfortable because of their judgment. You're not. And so, how about comfortably expressing your emotion and being a model to them that it's okay?
Yes. So I'm not going to apologize anymore.
Yes,
When
stop
I'm doing
it.
my crying, I'm going to say, yep, I'm crying.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. And can we end on how we maximize the experience of joy?
Yeah, well, so step one would be look at what's blocking it.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be a whole lot of self-judgment. It may be whining too much about circumstances that are bad and forgetting to remember what's good. So I think the short answer to how to maximize joy is stop suffering by recognizing that we are creating our own suffering. Okay, it's not our circumstances, we're creating it. And so, if we want greater joy, what are we telling ourselves to create our misery? It's probably irrational. Dispute the guts out of it, replace it with healthy thinking. And then repetition, repetition. Write it on your fridge, on your mirror, in your head, on your phone. Daily repetition for at least 30 days. That will change one's brain. And so the direct and indirect answer to your question, Gail, is prevent suffering in the ways I said. Think about our thinking, think in healthy ways, create healthy emotions, we will suffer less. And then there's a lot more energetic psychic space for experiencing what I believe, and my hunch is you do too, that joy is our natural state.
Yes. That's very beautiful and a wonderful, wonderful spot for us to end on. So I want to thank you for being here with us today. I want to thank our listeners for liking, subscribing, commenting, watching us on YouTube, Spotify, Google, Apple. And remember, like we did here today, share your stories because stories can heal. Have a wonderful week and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just had to tell you quickly, did you know the work of Wilhelm Reich?
Yeah,
My father was in prison with him.
Oh, what an honor. I say question mark, question
But
mark.
he never felt that he felt that he was it was an inside job in the prison, that he had not died of a heart attack or whatever they said.
Oh
Very,
God.
very
Yeah.
quiet man who
Wow.
kept himself and had his place filled with books and writing. And when he passed, they wouldn't give any of it to his family.
Oh,
So
Gail,
had
you are,
interesting characters.
yeah, Gail, you're such a wealth of interesting stories. Could we have a conversation sometime? I would like to hear more
Love
about
to.
that female drummer of color that you talked about. What was her name?
Elaine Jones. You can look her up.
Elaine
She's in,
Jones.
yes. And
Yeah.
my mother-in-law on Broadway, her name was Milroy Engram,
Okay.
Engram. But I can send it to you in a text.
Please do. And also, I would love to talk about many other things with you. I've got a 6 o'clock
Okay,
client
so
in
you
a few
go.
minutes. Yeah, but no, can we actually, I'll email you. Can we set up a Zoom time just for a conversation?
Yes, I'd love to.
Me too. And we can talk about Stanley Krippner as well.
Great.
It was a pleasure talking with you. I hope my material was
I
appropriate.
my thing about my podcast is if even one person gets helped by the show, then we've done a good job.
I will help more than
Or
one.
even better.
Yeah. Hey,
And
we can
that's all
have
I want to do
thousands.
is hopefully help others. That's the best service I can be.
Absolutely. Well, best
Okay.
wishes to your, what did you call him? Your beet brew husband?
Oh, he calls himself a Hebrew. I don't call him a
Nebro, to
Hebrew.
your Nebrew husband and
His
your
name is David
beautiful.
Levitt. All
And
right.
let's
I'll-
talk soon.
We'll talk soon. I'll send you an email and I'll
Okay.
also send you the link when we come out. Wonderful
Wonderful.
show. Mwah.
Wonderful. Mwah. Much
Thank you.
love. Thank you. Bye,
I'll
Gail.
see you in New York one time too.
I look forward to it. Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.